This is Jim Bish with the Americans Wartime Museum. Today's date is March 29, 2019, and I'm conducting an interview with Don Baumann in Sun City, Arizona. Don, could you please give me your full name and where you were born?
Yeah, my full name is Donald F. Baumann, and I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay, thank you. Did you grow up in Milwaukee then,
Yes,
in that area?
I grew up in Milwaukee, and I lived in Milwaukee, got married, and had children, and we moved out when I was 37, moved to Colorado.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier to me that you, after graduating, you went to Marquette University?
Correct.
And you went to engineering at engineering college there.
That is correct.
What did you? What type of engineering were you involved with?
I was involved in civil engineering.
And when was it that you graduated from Marquette?
I graduated from Marquette in 1952.
Okay.
November 1952, and after that, and later on, I got a master's degree in civil engineering. But
Okay.
after my military service.
When you graduated, of course, 1952, the Korean War was already ongoing by that time. At that time, how did you find your way into military service?
Oh, yeah. When I got out of the Marquette, I started a month later with U.S. Steel Company in Chicago, right nearby, and I didn't particularly like working at that with U.S. Steel in their training program. So shortly thereafter, about 2 months later, I was aware that the Air Force was looking for engineers and other doctors, dentists, what have you. So then I applied for a commission, and I was then they notified me that I was going to be commissioned as a second lieutenant, and in fact I was commissioned. It happened to be at a disciplinary barracks in Milwaukee, and it was about less than a half a mile from my house where I was commissioned in May of 1953.
And
then I went.
Did you go to basics
I went
or?
to basic training that began in the first week in June, and that basic training was about either 8 weeks or 2 months, and then that finished up at the end of July.
Where did you go to basics at?
Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio.
And after that,
I was assigned to Scott Air Force Base in electronics, and about the time when I first arrived there, there was a notice on the wall that said, if you want to be relieved from active duty temporarily, you can apply, and you can, and subject to our approval, you can leave the military. And so I left the military and went directly into, into reserve. I belonged to an Air Force Reserve, in which I attended meetings, and then I went back as a civilian during the work days, and shortly, within a year later, sooner than a year later, I decided I'd like to go to Germany and applied go back in the Air Force as a civil engineer, not as an electronics engineer. So then I was assigned to Germany and arrived there in August of 1954.
So back up just a little bit. So when you first went there in the Air Force after you got out of basics, you were at electronic engineering facility, and you
training school.
Right. And you didn't go through that school. You went into reserves from there.
Right.
And they accepted you into the reserves.
I cannot remember any more than a day or two on the base.
Yeah. And when you went to reserves, then you went into civil engineering.
Civil engineering.
What type
AFSC, installations? I guess you call them installation engineers. 5517, I think, was my AFSC, or 5521, but working on air-based facilities,
And
maintaining them.
What was your primary job there as a civil engineer? And how often did you work being in the reserves?
We attended meetings, and then I remember going to a summer camp at Selfridge Air Force Base for 2 weeks, and then right after that I was shipped overseas. So it was more or less educational.
Yeah.
Right.
And you said shipped overseas. This is when you did a tour in Germany.
That's correct. Right.
And where did they send you to Germany?
Wiesbaden, Germany, the United States Air Force and Europe headquarters.
And what was your job when you arrived at Wiesbaden?
I was assigned to installations at the headquarters. And, okay.
You can go ahead.
Okay, you can delete this.
Installations at headquarters.
Right.
What was your job there?
My job was to fill in as the low man on the totem pole in headquarters. There was more generals on the Air Force Base than second lieutenants, but we were assigned to certain tasks. Visited Air Base with senior officers, more senior than I, and in France and northern Germany, and let's see, I was acted as a courier of classified documents. We'd get on a train and deliver them.
Were you married at the time?
No, I was single at the time.
And so some of you've traveled around Germany and northern France and stuff as part of that.
And then during my next summer in 1955, I had 30 days of annual leave, and I was fortunate enough to take 30 days, and I visited practically in most countries in Europe. I went from Germany all the way up to Oslo, Norway, and then back down to Italy, down to Rome, and back up, everything in between. And I'm talking about the Western Europe,
yeah.
not the East Bloc.
Speaking of the East Bloc, where obviously this is part of the time period when the Soviet Union and the United States were having strong disagreements, and the border was right there between East Germany and West Germany, including Berlin, deep in East Germany. Did you have any role within the Cold War there between the tensions of the East and the West?
There were tensions at times between the East and the West. There were three corridors that were guaranteed at the Potsdam Agreement in 1945 between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. They guaranteed an air corridor, a rail corridor, and an Autobahn carrier from 3 different access points, coming in from the southwest, coming in from the west, and coming in from the northwest. The northwest would have been the British zone, and the southwest and the west would have been the American zone. So, and the planes where I was at, the base I was at, had Rhein-Main Air Base, which was about 20 miles east of there, where they had another Air Force station there, where all the planes, or part of the planes that were during the Berlin airlift came in through that corridor, central corridor. And in fact, okay, so you want me to expound a little bit more?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I did nothing heroic there. I was just one of numerous people that were required to be there to provide that there was keep the Soviets at bay. They needed X number of people there because what had happened in 1949 and 1950 with they shut down everything, all corridors except the air corridor, and they gave the Americans problems at the air corridor by trying to disrupt the air travel. And so we had sufficient troops there, and I was just one of the troops. I happened to, during the time I was there, flew in on the air corridor from Frankfurt into Berlin and back, and during that time, there were severe slowdowns of the not only rail traffic, but mainly the Autobahn traffic going from West Germany into Berlin. I'm not aware that they shut the corridors down, but they caused a huge delay. So instead of getting through in short order, it's a matter of many hours or even days. The line would back up, and it's a work slowdown or not a shutdown, but a severe slowdown. And so I was just one of many there.
Where, when you went to Berlin, you always went through the air corridor.
I went
You
through
never
the
went through the rail or the Autobahn.
No, not at the time I was in the service.
Uh-huh.
I've been back to Berlin several times since that, but not
Yeah.
while I was in the service.
And you mentioned also delivering of attaches or different documents.
Right, yes.
What were you doing there, and was
Okay.
that all Cold War related
Yes,
materials?
yes. To my knowledge, it was. I had secret documents that were sealed, and I'd deliver them from headquarters, USAFE, to the base. And I remember being on a train and going to down to Munich. I'd get on an overnight train and go there. I had that one of my responsibilities.
How long were you doing this type of work there?
Oh, 1 year.
1 year, the
From
entire time?
From about the summer of 1954 to the summer of 1955.
And that was the entire time you were in Germany?
Germany.
And
yeah.
you were doing most of that stuff that entire year?
Right, yeah.
What you were doing there?
Right.
Were you doing any civil engineering work? As far as what might be considered civil engineering work?
Yes, but not any structural or any municipal engineering, but the things where required some knowledge. Yeah. It was the area I was in. The smaller area was real estate, and they were in charge of real estate and whatever acquisitions or what have you.
Yeah.
So
Were you, what was your rank then at that
my
point?
rank all the time in Germany was second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant?
Yeah.
And after you left Germany, where did you go to?
I then went from Germany to headquarters at the Air Force in Great Britain, just west of London. I think it was the 5th Air Force. And I was stationed there for a relatively short period of time, and was later sent to RAF Alconbury.
And where was,
Air Force Station. That's about 70 miles straight north of London.
and what type of work were you doing there while you were in England?
At that particular time, it was an air base that had been used during World War II. There was the runways very adequate. There was not a plane on the runway during the entire time that I was there. And it was a situation where they had maintained just a small group of military to maintain the base, but not to fly anything in or out. So it'd be ready in case there was a flare-up. Because there was a flare-up. I recall there was a flare-up before I went to Germany in 1952. There was a standoff with the Soviets. So it just happened at that time, and so
Yeah, had most of the Air Force bases, of course, America had taken over a lot of RAF bases in England during World War II.
Right.
Had most of those American Air Force bases probably been in mothballed or whatever since after the war?
Well, they were sort of in mothballs, but I don't. What happened? There was numerous bases that I'm aware of they had numerous bases along the southeast part of Great Britain or England, England rather, because it was so you wouldn't have to so far to travel to fly the continent. Yeah.
And where you were at, this was one that was kind of just dormant, but it had
was
earlier been
dormant,
an active
yeah, it
base.
was farther from the coast
And
and
you
farther
were,
from the mainland of Europe.
and you were kind of there maintaining just in case they needed to start using it again.
That's correct.
What types of things did you do to maintain it?
Well, I was a junior officer the one I was working with is a major, and we did whatever was required, so. And nothing serious came up the whole entire time, no
Yeah.
serious problem.
Yeah. How many runways did you have there? Do you remember?
I remember, I think there were two. We used one main runway, at one time for a parade, and that's the only time it was used that I was there.
Yeah.
so.
Did they have hangars still available and things like
Yes,
that?
right, yeah.
And enough housing to house those that were stationed there?
Listed, all the officers were off base, so we had to get off base housing, which was kind of unique. I mean, the living accommodations, I don't know how much off the record here.
Yeah.
You can take everything. This is what I'm talking now. You're going to take away. Okay. I mean, I had plush duty when I was in Germany. I mean, it's A+, like 5-star. I lived in a hotel, the first building in Wiesbaden after the war, big building. They had all new. Then they had big building. They had all housing for the enlisted and the officers separated, but housing all brand new. I went to England. When I was in England. I lived off base the entire time. They'd find a place, housing would find you a place to live, and it was marginal. And at that time, I really couldn't figure out who lost the war, as far as the economics of the country, because it's both. And I remember I stayed at a place. The whole town I was at, and not a bigger town than that, I can't imagine the population was more than 2,000-3,000. So the accommodations in there were minimal, and I mean, I remember during the winter there, we had 3 kinds of heat. They had 2 different kinds, and then the one where you had to put in some English crowns or something. If it got too cold, put it in to make it run. And
So economically,
no housing for the officers, so it was
whatever you
marginal.
could find that was available.
In fact, I had a food allowance, so I could eat. And what the officers do, you have a food allowance. You can eat a GI food or on the economy. So you just pay where you're going. And I typically would eat on the base on a weekend. Well, on the weekends, I'd drive to the base to eat. And it's because the eating was so much better at the base than it would be in town. I mean, I lived above a fish and chips place, and so
That's what it was.
And I could smell the oil.
Yeah.
So,
Economically and somewhat physically, engineering-wise, Great Britain suffered tremendously during World War II. So what you're telling me is it really hadn't recovered too greatly.
it had not.
From when you were there.
It had not. Of course, the Germans hadn't recovered much either, and there was very little traffic on the roadways other than Americans, GIs, American cars. I had a car over there the entire time, and German trucks were on there, were hauling goods. And you had taxis, but other than real old taxis, but other than that, nobody could afford anything other than a motor scooter or something like that if you could afford it. It was just poor economics. Yeah.
Were the roads in generally good shape?
Oh yeah, they're in excellent shape. Yeah.
Other than the Autobahns, they were, damage from World War II to the roads were in good
I had
shape.
no problems at that time. I was driving the Autobahns on that trip I took throughout Europe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where they existed. That was an excellent system that they had there.
And I think they still do have a
Yeah.
really
Oh,
good
yeah.
system. So how long were you in England then?
It's about a year.
About a year? Maintaining that
The base,
airfield
yeah.
and the base. Where did they send you from there?
Well, then I went home. My 2 years, I went directly home. My 2 years that I signed up for had ended.
And you returned to Milwaukee?
I returned to Milwaukee.
And you were discharged, or were you still in reserves at that point?
I was in the reserve. I joined the reserve.
Uh-huh.
I was in the reserve.
Yeah.
And I was later promoted to captain.
And
I took education courses at the Air Force Academy after I got out, and that's probably why they promoted me to captain.
And so you had your bachelor's at Marquette before you
Right,
entered,
before, yeah.
and then afterwards, did you immediately go to school or go back to
no,
school to get your
no,
master's, or
no.
this gradually over
I
the years?
graduated, but then I went back to work with the company that I had worked with before and did engineering work, municipal work, and the city of Milwaukee. And then I went back with them, and I worked there for many years. I got 2 years of 2 years of credit while I was overseas. And shortly after I got back home, I found out that the University of Wisconsin had offering a program, a master's degree in Milwaukee. So these were all, everyone in my class were engineers and were working. And the class was held at night, 1 day a week. So it took about 4 years of that, and I graduated with a master's degree in civil engineering. So, and the professors drove from Madison to Milwaukee.
Pretty good
It's
drive.
yeah, and it was. I attended. I mean, which is unique. I attended the campus, the University of Wisconsin, for 1 hour in my life when I went for an oral interview prior to prior to graduation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did, and outside, that's about it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Did your military service during that time period, you were just living over in Europe for those 2 years.
Right.
Did that benefit, anything there benefit your later life or things that you realized?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah. Well, I went under the GI Bill, and I was making more per hour on the GI Bill after I paid tuition than what I was on the job, engineering job. So that was unique.
Yeah.
And so what was that question again? The other one? Did I use?
What benefits did you see from having your military service, and especially from having lived over in Europe for a couple of years?
Oh, okay. Oh, I got it. I got benefits. I've been to Europe numerous times, but one thing I don't want to forget about is there's a requirement I became a registered professional engineer in Wisconsin. I took the test after I got out of school after being out of 4 years, which is the criteria to use it. But then it's the criteria, you have to be out of school 4 years to take the test, but they want 4 years of engineering service. For some reason, they didn't credit any of my military service, so then about 2 years later, I had 4 years of I had 4 years of engineering service excluding the military.
So it delayed you 2 years
So, yeah, getting
your professional engineering.
license, which isn't required, but it's beneficial.
Yes.
It's a level that isn't achieved by everybody.
Yeah. Did you work with engineering then when you made your move to Colorado?
Oh yes, yeah, I moved there. Yeah, we decided we had 2 children at the time. I was required to stay in the city of Milwaukee and work with the city of Milwaukee. If I had to live in the city of Milwaukee, if I was going to work for the city of Milwaukee, and things were not favorable in Milwaukee at the time.
For raising a family.
This is off the record. You had riots and all this stuff was happening, busing of kids, or 8 school buses going down a corner of ours. I couldn't send my kids to school, and I had to look, and this was a family move.
Did you?
And I was looking here. I placed my family above the job. Okay, so this shouldn't go on the record because it's somebody that's going to say he's racial or something like that. So.
Yeah, that's so you moved to Colorado and that's where you finished your career at?
Yeah,
in Colorado.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
And
we moved out of there in '85 when I was 54. I was doing consultant work about 5 years. I was doing consultant work about 5 years. 4 or 5 years before we moved. So then I did consulting work down in Arizona, only one job, but I'd go back for 4 years
Yeah.
And back to Colorado, Fort Collins, Colorado, 4 years, 4 summers, I was doing consultant work back there. It was more difficult communicating because of working with plans on the job here.
Yeah.
And they sent a job during the wintertime down to me. I'd go to during the summertime, and I worked for 4 more years, and that was it.
Yeah. Is there anything, before we conclude, is there anything that stands out with your time period over in Europe in the military that you maybe we didn't touch upon? Anything that you can remember, any special thing that occurred over there concerning the tensions between
No.
East and West?
No, the one thing I was pleased to be in the military and do my part at the military. I thought and everything worked out fine for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Don. Thank you for the interview.
Okay, Jim. Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay.